Alright guys, what's up? Welcome to another mixing tutorial. Let's get in the mix. There's a lot to talk about. This is Alive. A true bop of a song I didn't cover earlier because of this. Wow. Turns out it's not as hard as I thought it was. So let's go over this mix. As usual, I will turn off the master bus effects and show them at the end, because at the end is when I put them on, when mixing. So we have a new drum sound. That is correct. This one was meant to be very impacty, very consistent. Not really too dynamic, as you can see by the programming. I don't do much dynamics, and when I do, it's blast beats. That's pretty funny. So let's see what are the components of this drum tone. The bulk of it is Get Good Drums Modern and Massive Shells. And it's the P4 cymbals. Then I am reinforcing the kick-in snare with one-shots from the Andrew Wade Drum Shots collection. Right here. Drum Shots Andrew Wade. So in this case, the sledge kick. Ooh. Like, come on. Like this. Hell yes. And the sledge snare. Very, very heavy. Also for Alive, I needed to get the tom rim hits at the beginning. So here's a Superior Drummer tom. Pretty funny. It's the only tom rim hit I had sampled. Sounds super cool. But that's not an important part. So let's get into it. Let's not use the one-shots for now, which I only added at the end, and play the drums without plugins and then show the plugins. So we start with this. Pretty good starting point. Sample selection. My favorite modern and massive kick is this one. The Yamaha Recording Custom Birch. So are the toms. And the snare is one of the fatter ones, the Guru Paduk snare. Very low tuned, very heavy drums. Just the sound I was looking for. I will always start by processing the kick into a nice, scooped, consistent metal kick drum. So there's some big changes there, and let's discuss them. First thing in the kick drum is an EQ to scoop it. You'll notice it's a scoop mostly in the 180, 300, and 700 region, and not really a mid-range scoop, more like a low mid-range scoop. Ooh. Hopefully you can hear how that removes so much junk and it looks like we've tuned the kick drum down. This is a very cool way to process your kick drum for a metal sound. Drop down on the 400, 300, 200 even region and make it scoopy. The SSL EQ is coming here to brighten the kick drum with boosts at 8K and about 1K. So that's a lot of brightness. And also the compression here. So you can see it's about a 200 millisecond release, 3:1 ratio, and the normal SSL attack. If you have an SSL style plugin, try the compressor on it because it sounds really cool on kick drum. And this SSL also emulates the saturation of driving an SSL board hard, so it gets it makes sure that the attack is not too pointy. It cuts it off a little bit, and it boosts the decay and low level stuff as well. So this is a pretty cool kick drum solution. And then a usual processing you will see me do on all the shells is this transient designer. So a transient designer is meant so that you can boost certain frequencies only when the transient is only during the transient. So I have these regions of frequency selected. So this one is between 50 and 100 hertz. And I am telling the plugin to, whenever the kick drum is hit for 10 milliseconds and another 10 of release, so basically for 20 milliseconds, which is a very fast window, when the kick drum is hit, you're going to boost 6 decibels of this frequency. And also at the high frequencies above 3K, 3 decibels. This has the result of I am boosting the low end on the attack of the kick drum, but not the low end on the decay. So let's listen for it. It's not a small difference by any stretch of the imagination, but if I were to boost these frequencies statically with an EQ, you would always be getting that, or here, and the decay will always be getting this. But on this transient designer, I am only boosting those on the attack, which is exactly what I want. So if you can find a multi-band transient designer to emulate this trick, that's a cool thing to do. There's this one by Waves, TransX Multi. There's Joey Sturgis Tone's Transify. And at the lack of a multi-band one, you can just use a full-range transient designer, which is a good tool to have. I should have one here. I used to have one that was free. I think this Transient Plus by Audio Assault is free. It has attack, so it boosts all the frequencies, but you should try it as a drum shaping tool. Next, we go into a clipper. The clipper is to make sure that those frequencies we boosted on the attack don't get too pokey, because the kick drum is meant to poke out, but not poke out too much, or else it will destroy the limiter by the time we finish mixing. It will be too loud for just 20 milliseconds at a time. So you can clip it. Literally, you can see peaks getting chopped off. And it also adds a nice distortion to the peaks that makes them poke through. But in a good way and not a subby, compressor destroying way. And then, to soften it up actually, to make the kick drum a little bit larger, I have a limiter, but it's doing very little work. It just chops off the peaks. If I overdo it, you'll hear what I'm going for. If I overdo it, you can hear that the kick drum loses all the punch, but it becomes very fluffy and loud. I am going for the 10% of that effect. So there you go. This is where I would start with doing the kick drum. And would move on to snare. From now on, it's going to be faster to explain because every shell has the same philosophy of processing. I will shape the sound. I will further shape the sound with the SSL EQ and compressor. I will do transient designing. I will clip and I will limit. So it only changes based on what shell type it is. Firstly, I thought the snare sounded a bit too woody, a little bit too natural. We can make it more hyper by giving it this kind of a shape, again with a scoop around 500 and a boost around 70. These are very low snare frequencies to make sure the snare can match the kick in terms of sub energy. Nothing has more sub energy than the kick, but the snare can't be too far off, or else it sounds like a very deep kick, and then a pokey snare, which we don't want. May sound subtle, but it makes a big difference. SSL channel strip, mostly here for the compression. You can immediately hear how it sounds like the snare's attack changes character and the decay becomes a little bit more quiet. When I turn it on, it just sounds like the drummer is hitting harder, and that's also thanks to this 150 boost. You can see it distort when I boost too much, and that's thanks to the saturation emulation. We're again only going for like 10-20% of that effect. And also, reducing 3K can be a cool way to reduce the snare bottom harshness. If I take it all the way out, it's very soft. And if I boost it, you see that's where the harshness is. Transient designing. Here, we're going for the same high-end boost, but the low-end boost is going to be all the way up to 220 Hertz because the snare occupies those frequencies a lot better. The kick drum is meant for lower stuff. Weak. Strong. Very cool. Into a clipper. Snare can get clipped harder, as you see, because it has less low-end content, and low-end content, when clipped, is what makes stuff muddy. And then a limiter to soften it up again. All right. Way better already. We would then go on to process some toms. Let's go for a tom part. All right, so every tom gets that same treatment. So let's try tom 2. Scoop dee whoop. Shit. Just tom, please. SSL. No compression though here, just reducing mid-range once again and using the saturation tool. Transient designing. Focusing a lot on the high-end boost here to make sure the toms have nice stick attack. And the clipping. Let's check a before and after. Big stuff. Every tom has this. It's just the EQ in the beginning that changes a little bit for each one. So low to high, you can see that it shifts a little bit downwards as the tom tuning shifts as well. And then on the tom bus, I compress them all together. This gives them some nice jumpy energy. Makes sure that they poke out a little bit more. And then in EQ, the filter at 50 is to make sure that they don't have sub frequencies that go on like doom after they're hit. And a little bit more brightness for that stick attack. That's what we got for toms. Cool. Now the next part is to hype those cymbals, make them sound nice, shiny, and hard-hitting, and to take care of the rooms to get the snare decay that we want. So everything that's not a direct mic, I have here on my so-called brass bus. So this is cymbals and rooms. And this, since it's where all the cymbals are, is where I treat bad cymbal resonances. Firstly, I high pass anything beneath 50 hertz because whatever beneath 50 hertz comes from these rooms and overheads is trash. It should be kick drums region only. And the first EQ I have is to make sure that the low end content on these doesn't get too big, not bigger than the direct mics anyway. Sounds cool by itself, but it interferes with the direct mics. And some harshness reducing bands here. So here's one that's a very specific whistle. Mostly on the right crash, I think. Can't find a part with that, but it's there. And a wider one at 3.8, which is just a harsh region that can be tamed on these cymbals. I don't likey. Then into Brainworks refinement. So what you see me doing here on these bands to refine and control the harshness on the cymbals, this guy does automatically based on the material it's presented. You can see how soft they are when I overdo it. And you can see what it's taking away when I solo filter, which I just solo what it's doing. So this is a cool guide to give you a different perspective on this. Doing it manually is the best, but this can help give you a different kind of harshness control. I love this tool. And the limiter is here to get the snare peak out of the overheads and rooms. It's actually so light that it's not really doing anything, but I'll leave it there. Overheads. So this is our cymbal material. We need to get this very hyped up. Look at this. This is very important processing. It may not look like much in solo, but with the whole drums, it's the difference between weak cymbals and strong cymbals. The first thing is an EQ. The overheads are a bit too mid-rangey. I don't want this boxiness in the cymbals. And here's some further harshness reducing. Similar moves in the SSL EQ just for some different flavor. And the high-end boost, which is a very soft 9K shelf. Very subtle. I prefer to boost with an EQ like this and to cut with an EQ like this. This is surgical, good for cutting, and this is very broad strokes, good for boosting. And this guy is it. So this is my overhead compression. It doesn't need to be the Drumforge compressor. It just needs to be a compression that hits the cymbals a little bit so that you can make them move in volume and make them a bit louder. You can see it here. If I overdo it, you can hear what it sounds like. It sounds like bombing drummer. But if you overdo it, it gets too washy. So compression on your cymbals is a thing to take care of. All right, next up, we have the rooms where we want to get the correct amount of drum shell roominess, basically. I don't have a lot of cymbals in the rooms. It's actually mostly just snare. And if you know my drum mixing, you'll see why in a minute. But first, the refinement guy. I want even less harsh cymbals in the rooms. Almost super fictitious, but it's still there on the room bus, so affecting all the rooms. Room close and room mono, I like to keep unaffected in the Modern and Massive kit. They're just this very realistic picture of the snare and the shells and cymbals that I like to keep. Anyways, very quiet. Room 4 is where my magic happens. So it sounds like this. And then it sounds like this. So the key here is that it's mostly just snare. And when you compress it, you're going to slam the snare into it, making the decay of it very, very long, which makes it stand out in the whole drum picture. I'm going to bypass it on and off with the whole drum mix. Snare decay. That's just it. You slam the room snare and you're good to go. But then I had to shape it with EQ because it was a little bit too boxy for the other style of shell mixing we did. If you see without EQ, it's very cool, but it's very open. And if I put it on, it becomes just a bit more controlled the way I would like it. By now, I run this against bass and guitars. And it sounds good, but then I think this needs a bit more consistency, and that's where I put the one-shots in. It's like steroids for the drum sound. I basically leave them unaffected, except for the snare one shot, where I give it a bit more brightness. Just to make sure it hits a little bit stronger on the attack. Next, I did the drum bus, because as you can see, it sounds a bit disjointed with the rest of the mix. So when you do some cool stuff on the bus, it will sound very much more like a united drum sound. The first one is this exciter, which basically it just distorts different frequency regions. I turn it all the way up on the low mid, high mid, and treble ones. And I turn the mix way down. This is what it sounded like if I left the mix 100%. It sounds awesome, but I just want 10% of it. You'll see this is a way I like to do stuff. Pump everything to the max and mix it in. Boring. Exciting. This is a very, very cool technique I am experimenting with. Scooping a little bit of the 300 region. Just unnecessary boominess on all the shells. If you overdo it, you once again get that very scooped sound we're not looking for. Compressor. So we're here to tuck the snare in because the snare is poking way too loud. And we're going to tuck it in. And when it's tucked in, it's going to take down the rest of the drums with it and give us the glued sound. Pokey. Glued. It's magic. Some more EQ magic. This is a low end and high frequency, low frequency and high frequency boost. So this high frequency is more like high mids at 3K for shell snappiness and cymbal aggression. All that 3K we took out on the cymbals, we can add in a broader stroke here. And the 60 boost is here to make the kick drum pop. just a slightly more exciting version of our drum tone. And we're once again going to chop the snare off a little bit. All right. Then this was a decision after I heard it with bass and guitars for a while. I further boosted the kick and snare with another set of tools. So an EQ and a harmonic exciter. What happened was I thought the kick was needing to poke a little bit more on the bass, very sub region. So to make the kick drum stand out a bit more, there was a little high shelf at 1K, so it's a little bit more clicky, and further reducing of the annoying low mids, and a very, very tiny bit of harmonic excitement on the 50 Hertz region. All off, all on. This is basically just making the kick drum that a little bit more metal. And to the snare, I did the same treatment, but the dip is a little bit higher in the 900 region to get rid of woodiness again. And the boost is at 160. If I overdo it, you can hear how it gets boomy, but in the right amount, it's a little bit of beef. And that is a finalized drum sound. I'm happy with it. I'll be changing some stuff as I reuse it for different covers, but it's a very cool one. I should be sending you guys back to this one to not describe it in all my covers, so you can now go back to the following cover you were watching if that was the case. Thank you for coming back. Let's move on to bass. I'll speed up now because that was a big drum sound. So this is programmed bass. This is our boy Eurobass. By the man Herman Amitovich. This is what the DI sounds like. And we'll be doing this. First things first, duplicate the bass signal into 2 tracks. One of them is going to be this. If you apply a filter to it, and you limit it for consistency, you get your low-end track. This is how we get not too distorted of a low-end signal to mix in with something like this. So here I run the DI through this free plugin, actually, an emulation of a SansAmp. I get it to sound a bit like this. And then I run it through these filters to get rid of the low end. That's a high pass at 300 Hertz. And you mash them together and get this. Now I'll make it sound big at the bus where we combine the two of them. First is increasing a little bit of bass at the 75 Hertz region with some harmonic excitement. This is Renaissance Bass by Waves, and it creates harmonics in the bass region. It's a little bit different than an EQ. It acts a little bit more dynamically. Then we get Scoopy. The SansAmp has a load of mid-range we can take off here in this 500 region. filters are very minimal. A limiter, mostly here to get the right volume, but also to get consistency between all the notes. And here's the filter that gets rid of the annoying high-end fizz. This is at 5K. And we also get rid of sub beneath 50 Hertz because that's for the kick. Very cool. Moving on to guitars. Guitars are all going to be a secret plugin that I hope to be able to tell you in about a month what it is. When I can, you'll be sure to see it in the description of the video on the Patreon page. Just like the last Remedy Polaris cover I did, I can't tell you what they are just yet. Here's what they sound like out of the plugin. I think you should be excited for it. And here's what I'm going to process them to be. Very simple stuff. Here's an EQ I'm going to have across almost all of the guitars, so I don't have to explain it all this time. One thing will always be a low-end filter, so depending on if it's a lead or rhythm guitar part, usually anything beneath 70 will always go away, and as the guitar part gets higher, I get to remove more of it to make room for bass. And there's going to be this dynamic boy. So I'm reacting to this annoying low mid frequency of the palm mutes. And only cutting it when it's louder. So it uses this threshold here so that this band only basically acts as a compressor, which is cool. All the guitars are going to have this to control this 200 region. And a little boost at 3K too to make them a bit spikier. Then a lot of the guitars will have this compressor too. That just makes sure that everything is the same volume and they're a nice wall of guitar. Or harshness control guy to get rid of this bullshit. And then whatever EQ I need to refine it. Here's some manual harshness control. And a few low mid cuts. That's a guitar tone. But you can see how reducing low mids and compressing it makes it pop out the way I like. What is this? Oh, all right. So this is the same tone as the rhythms, but with a bit reduced gain. Same EQ, same compressors, but what's flanging it is this very cool flanger by Waves. These are the Waves guitar emulation pedals. And this flanger sounds exactly like the Alive flanger. So that's what I used to make the sound. I'm sure you can make it with a different plugin, but you're here to know what I used. So that was it. The rest of the tone is the same, except for the coming out of the plugin with less gain, the same as this lo-fi one. It comes like that out of the plugin. There's that EQ. That compressor, which is actually not working. I just copied and pasted out of laziness. And the same harshness control EQ and low-end filter. Here the low-end filter gets to be a bit more aggressive because it's meant to be lo-fi. So all the way up to 120 instead of the usual 80 or 70. Solo time. Out of the plugin like this. How do you like those perfect sweeps? Not at all. So a very cool lead sound out of that very exciting plugin. Effects, here we go. Firstly, delay, 8th note, stereo. That's basically all you need to know. 25% mix, make sure there's a lot of delay on the signal. Reverb, about 3 seconds at a 25% mix. And compression ties it all together to make sure that the tails are just as loud as the attacks. You'll see it here. When these tails are hitting, it's not reducing the signal, which is exactly what I want to make the tails louder. Lead sounds. Very, very simple, but very good sounds. A very aggressive filter at 150, because all the low end is unnecessary since it's high up in the neck. The same 200 Hz dynamic control. Fizz filtering at 8K. And those additional EQ cuts. This very spooky lead. It's all about that reverb. 10 seconds of 100% mix reverb. You get this. And then it's all about the aggressive filtering. So high pass at 650 and a low pass at 8K, as well as a nice high-end boost at 4K, which is a very aggressive, annoying frequency. And you get a scary lead. That's pretty easy. Other than that, we are done. Here's a reverse guitar effect I made. This is the rhythm guitar patch, but I grabbed a note and then I automated a pitch shifter to go up on that note. And it's a very cool transition mechanism. It just has a filter so that it's not rumbling in the low end. It's meant to play with your rhythm guitars. So if you use the same tone as your rhythm guitars, it's always going to play with it and work. Also with the lead. They take each other's place. And the rest is my usual explosion effect. No, not this one. That one is filtered. This one. Sometimes the cymbal swell. And on the big ports, a sub drop. That is all you need to know about the mix. Very big mix tutorial. Thank you guys so much for supporting. I hope these are valuable to you. Once I can reveal the guitar plugin, I'll let you know in the description of the Patreon post. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.